It was a regular Tuesday morning in May 2025. The air in Nashville was warm, steady, predictable, but inside a sleek glass studio just off Music Row, something far from ordinary was brewing. Candace Owens, conservative firebrand and media icon, adjusted her microphone and leaned into her notes. Her podcast, watched by millions, thrived on controversy, and today, she had struck gold. Her guest, Ibrahim, the 35-year-old president of Burkina Faso, a man critics called a military strongman, and supporters hailed as a new face of African leadership. She smirked slightly as she flipped through her questions. Loaded, confrontational, and designed to corner. Let's see how well this soldier boy handles real media, she muttered to her producer. The team chuckled. But halfway across the world, in the heart of Ouagadougou, a very different atmosphere filled the air. President Ibrahim stood at the window of his office, watching the red dust swirl over the capital city. He had just wrapped a cabinet meeting. Now, he was reviewing a one-page summary from his communications chief, Moussa Kabori. She's known to interrupt her guests, throw bait, and paint with a broad brush. Moussa said with a furrowed brow. This won't be friendly. Ibrahim adjusted his tie. Calm as ever. I've walked through rebel ambushes. Moussa, I think I can handle a podcast. Still. The room wasn't without tension. This wasn't just a podcast. It was one of the biggest conservative platforms in America. A misstep here wouldn't just embarrass him. It could reinforce every single stereotype the world had of African leaders. At 2:00 p.m. Nashville time, 8:00 p.m. in Burkina Faso, the interview went live. Candace opened with her signature smile and sharp delivery. Good afternoon, folks. Today, we've got Ibrahim, the so-called president of Burkina Faso. Now, let's get real. You took power through a military coup. Didn't you, boom? The first punch. Most guests would panic, stammer, or try to dodge. But Ibrahim didn't blink. Good evening, Miss Owens, he replied, his voice even. I appreciate the directness. It shows you've done at least some research, though perhaps not enough. His tone was calm, but unmistakably firm. A slow silence crept over the studio in Nashville. Candace raised her eyebrows. This was unexpected. Oh, I've done my research. She snapped back. Besh. Running one of the poorest countries on earth. Never ran a company. Never managed a budget over $500. What makes you think you're qualified to run a nation? The attack was clear, personal, strategic, dismissive. Ibrahim didn't flinch. Miss Owens, it seems you've made several assumptions, he said. First, that age dictates ability. Second, that poverty equals incompetence. And third, that you understand African governance from a studio in Tennessee. And just like that, the tables tilted. Candace's smirk faltered. Just a little. The team behind the glass shifted uneasily. This wasn't going to be the takedown she had planned. Candace leaned forward in her chair, her voice sharp, her eyes locked on the screen. She could feel the control slipping, and she wasn't about to let it go. Oh, please, she said, almost laughing. Let's not dance around the truth here. Africa has a long history of corruption, failed leadership, and military takeovers. What makes you different from every other so-called reformer who ends up becoming a tyrant in a fancy suit. The question wasn't just confrontational. It was designed to provoke, to humiliate. And in any other interview, it might have worked. But Ibrahim Troy didn't blink. In his office, thousands of miles away, he simply adjusted his microphone and looked calmly into the camera. "Miss Owens," he said, his tone steady, "you are asking questions not to understand, but to confirm a narrative that says Africans are incapable of leading themselves with dignity. That story may play well on your show, but it doesn't reflect the truth on the ground." Behind the scenes, Candace's producer Alex was pacing. This was off script. She was supposed to dominate this conversation, but instead, her guest was dismantling her premise calmly, factually, relentlessly. "You assumed power through force." Candace pushed again, her voice rising. "My audience deserves to know how many people died when you took office. How many political opponents are in jail right now because of you. It was an ambush classic, Candace. The kind of moment that went viral." But instead of defending himself, Ibrahim leaned forward slightly. "I'll answer your question," he said. "But first, may I ask you something?" Candace blinked. "Excuse me. Before we discuss Burkina Faso's challenges," Ibrahim said, "perhaps you could share your own qualifications for making sweeping claims about African politics. What's your background in African history? How many times have you visited the continent you so confidently condemn?" The question hit like a gut punch. Candace's lips parted for a comeback, but nothing came. In truth, she had never set foot in Africa. Her knowledge came from headlines, think pieces, and policy reports. "I don't need to visit a country to recognize tyranny," she snapped, but her tone wavered. Ibrahim nodded slowly. "Interesting. So you feel comfortable judging an entire continent without ever having experienced its people, its struggles, or its progress firsthand." There was no anger in his voice, no sarcasm, just truth, and it landed with devastating clarity. For a moment, the studio fell quiet. Even the crew stopped moving. Candace tried to reset. "Look, I'm the host. I ask the questions. Let's stay focused. Why should Americans care about yet another African regime with a fancy name and no real results?" Ibrahim sat back. Then he spoke. "In the last 3 years," he said, "Burkina Faso has held 3 municipal elections, all overseen by international observers. We've built 847 schools, cut infant mortality by nearly a third, and reduced our dependency on foreign aid by 67%. He paused. "Does that sound like a regime or a nation rebuilding itself?" Despite the odds, Candace scrambled for a pivot. "Statistics are easy. But what about freedom of speech, opposition? Are you silencing the media?" "Not at all," Ibrahim replied. "We have 23 independent newspapers, 15 radio stations, and 8 television networks, most of which criticize me daily. Would you like me to connect you with some of them?" Candace opened her mouth, then closed it. This wasn't going as planned. Her viewers could feel it. And so could she. The man she expected to expose was exposing her. Candace Owens was no stranger to heated interviews. She'd gone head-to-head with politicians, CEOs, activists, even celebrities. But this felt different. This felt like standing in the center of a storm she didn't see coming. She cleared her throat, grasping for ground. "Okay," she said. forcing a smile. Anyone can throw around numbers and say things look good on paper, but the reality is, Africa still struggles with instability. And your country, Mr. Troy, is no exception. Isn't that the truth? Ibrahim didn't respond immediately. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. Miss Owens, he said, you speak of reality. But whose reality is it? The one projected in Western media, or the one lived by our people every day? Candace opened her mouth, but he continued. Let me ask you something. When you think of Africa, what comes to mind? Be honest. Candace scoffed, irritated by the shift in tone. I see a continent that needs help, that needs guidance. One riddled with poverty and corruption. Ibrahim nodded. Slowly. Exactly. You see a child, a broken place, a problem that needs fixing. But that view says more about your perspective than it does about Africa. The studio was silent. Candace shifted in her chair. This wasn't the conversation she'd planned. She had come to challenge a dictator, not to be challenged herself. But now, Ibrahim's words weren't just landing. They were digging in. You want to talk about aid? He asked. In the past 60 years, Africa has received billions in assistance, most of it with strings attached. Aid that enriches contractors. Aid that pushes agendas. Aid that rarely empowers us to stand on our own. He paused. In the past 3 years, we've reduced our dependency by 2/3. We're building. We're teaching. We're healing. Not because the West told us how, but because we finally stopped listening. Candace sat frozen, blinking slowly. Her usual arsenal of comebacks felt dull now. She fired one last shot. You're deflecting, she said, voice tight. The question is whether you'll actually step down when your term ends. Or will you cling to power like the others? Ibrahim didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. But his voice carried something sharper than mockery clarity. I've already scheduled elections for next year. International observers invited. Term limits respected. Transparency ensured. He looked into the camera. Meanwhile, some American politicians have held power for 50 years. Tell me who's afraid of letting go. The blow was soft, but it landed hard. Behind the glass, Candace's producer didn't dare a signal. No one wanted to interrupt whatever this had become. Candace exhaled. Her hands, once clenched, now lay flat on the desk. You're twisting my words, she muttered. No, Ibrahim replied, voice calm. I'm responding to them. A beat of silence. Then came the line that cracked something deep. Miss Owens, he said, you began this interview trying to shame me. But shame only works if I accept someone else's judgment of my worth. And I don't. He paused. I know who I am. I know what I've done. The question is, do you? And just like that, the room felt smaller. The camera lights harsher. The microphone heavier. Candace Owens, confident, relentless, unshakable, was speechless on her own show. And the world was watching. The silence was unbearable. Not because of dead air, there were still a million viewers tuned in, but because Candace Owens had never been left without words, until now. Ibrahim's final question, do you know who you are, hung in the air like a weight she couldn't ignore? Her throat tightened. For years, she had built her brand on certainty. On chaque questions, firm lines, and unwavering convictions. But right now, in front of the world. She was being forced to ask herself something far more dangerous than anything she had ever asked a guest. What if I've been wrong? She adjusted her chair. A reflex to ground herself. It didn't work. I represent conservative values, she said finally. Her voice quieter now. I believe in truth, in accountability, and calling out hypocrisy. Her eyes met the lens. But her voice trembled. Do you? Ibrahim's expression didn't change. His presence, as always, was still grounded, like stone, beneath the wind. Truth, he said, requires more than sound bites. It demands research, humility, nuance. He leaned slightly closer to the camera. And accountability, he continued. It's not just about pointing fingers. It's about turning that mirror on yourself and asking, when was the last time I admitted I was wrong? The question struck harder than any insult ever could. Candace's mouth parted slightly. She blinked, then looked down for the briefest moment. Her notes, once a shield, now just paper. The live chat was flooding with comments, some mocking her, some praising Ibrahim, some just stunned. She had lost control, but more importantly, she was beginning to lose the armor she had worn for years. She began, then stopped. The studio lights felt too bright. Her mind was moving in directions it never had. I don't know, she said finally. I don't know the last time I really. Ibrahim's gaze softened, but his voice remained strong. There's no shame in admitting that, Miss Owens. In fact, it may be the first true strength you've shown today. And then, for the first time, Candace didn't push back. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't defend, didn't pivot. She just listened. Because somewhere deep inside, she knew that this wasn't about Burkina Faso anymore. It wasn't about foreign policy, statistics, or ideological battles. It was about something she had avoided for a long time, facing the blind spots in her own convictions. I've spent so long challenging others, she whispered, but I don't think I've ever stopped to challenge the foundation of what I believe. Ibrahim nodded, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. Many people never do, he said. But the great ones, the ones who truly lead, start with themselves. The interview, once a sparring match, had become something entirely different. It was now a mirror, a moment of truth for both of them. Candace cleared her throat again, but not to fight. This time, it was to steady herself. You're right, she said. The words came slowly, but they came honestly. I judged a continent based on what I was told, not what I had seen. I came in here thinking I had all the answers. But maybe I never really asked the right questions. Ibrahim didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just sat there quiet, present, real. And in that stillness, something powerful happened. For the first time in her career, Candace Owens wasn't the one exposing someone. She was the one being exposed. When the live stream finally ended, Candace Owens sat in silence. Her earpiece crackled with static. But she didn't move. Her hands were still folded on the desk, her chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. No victory lap. No smug closeout. Just silence. Behind the glass. Her producer Alex didn't speak either. No one did. Then came the sound. Ping. 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 Notifications. Hundreds of them. Thousands. The world had been watching. And now, it was responding. Within minutes, the hashtags began to trend. Number Owens vs Troy. Number Burkina Rise. Number Candace exposed. Number Ibrahim speaks. The internet exploded. Not with outrage, but with stunned admiration. Clips of Ibrahim's calm responses circulated like wildfire. On TikTok, on Twitter, on YouTube Shorts. Side-by-side comparisons showed Candace's aggression against his poise, her provocations against his truth. And something even rarer happened. Candace Owens, the untouchable, the iron-willed, was being praised for listening. Backstage, she scrolled through the comments. Her eyes moved slowly, reading messages from all over the world. Never thought I'd say this, but Candace showed growth today. Respect to President Troy, man, is unshakable. This is how leaders act. Calm, composed, educated. Candace finally met her match and didn't run from it. There were critics too. Of course. Some accused her of going soft. Others said she had been manipulated. But the loudest voice was surprise. Candace dialed her producer. "Alex," she said quietly. "We need to talk." "I know," he replied instantly. "This thing just blew up. It's not just viral. It's global. I didn't expect this." She admitted. "You're not alone." Alex said, "No one did." "But here's the thing, people aren't just talking about him. They're talking about you." Candace fell silent. Alex continued. "They're saying you changed. That something cracked. That for once, you didn't bulldoze your guest, you listened." Candace closed her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I went in ready for a takedown. And instead," Alex said softly, "you got a wake-up call. Across the ocean. In Ouagadougou." Ibrahim Troy's phone was lighting up too. Calls from journalists, invitations from Harvard, emails from youth organizations across Africa. He hadn't just survived Candace Owens, he had transformed the conversation. Not just about Burkina Faso, not just about Africa, but about leadership itself. Over dinner that evening, his wife Aja looked across the table, smiling. "You didn't just defend your country today," she said. "You reminded the world what real strength looks like." Ibrahim shook his head with a humble chuckle. "I thought I was just correcting a few lies. I didn't expect all this." She leaned closer. "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't attack. You taught. And the world listened." That night, Candace stared out her apartment window in Nashville. She had built a career on confrontation. But today had shaken something loose. She hadn't just met a foreign president. She had met a man who led not through fear or ego, but through conviction. And deep down, she knew the truth. This interview wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. 2 weeks after the interview, Candace Owens did something she had never done in her entire career. She booked a one-way flight to West Africa. The headlines didn't know what to make of it. "Candace visits dictator she couldn't defeat on air." From Nashville to Ouagadougou, a conservative's reckoning. Owens touches down in Burkina Faso redemption or optics. But Candace didn't care about optics anymore. She was chasing something she couldn't explain, a truth she had seen in Ibrahim's eyes. A steadiness, a sense of purpose she couldn't shake. As her plane touched down in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, she pressed her forehead to the window. The world outside wasn't what she expected. There was no chaos, no soldiers with rifles, no failed state imagery from the news. There were kids laughing near school gates, street vendors selling mangoes under the sun, bright murals painted on cinder block walls. Life was happening, and it didn't look broken. She was met at the airport by members of Ibrahim's press team, not in armored cars, but in modest SUVs. One of the aides handed her a schedule. Day 1 school visit. Day 2 community health center. Day 3 marketplace and women's cooperative. Day 4 interview with the president. Candace raised an eyebrow. He actually wants to meet me again. After all that, the aide smiled. He said, "Let her see with her own eyes. Then we'll talk again." Her first stop was a school, one of the 847 Ibrahim's government had built in just 3 years. Bright hallways, students in crisp uniforms, teachers explaining science in French and Mure. The walls were covered in hand-drawn posters about clean water, solar power, and women in STEM. Candace stood in the back of a classroom, watching a girl raise her hand with confidence. "This isn't what I thought," she whispered. Her guide, a local principal, turned to her gently. "That's because you've never been here. But now you are. Welcome." That night, in her hotel room, Candace looked through her own notes from years past, talking points, headlines, podcast summaries. All of it felt so small now. The next day, she visited a rural health clinic. Mothers cradling newborns, nurses operating on solar-powered generators. A doctor showed her the infant mortality chart, down 31% in 3 years. How, she asked. "Stunned. Because we stopped waiting for help from the outside." He replied, "We decided to heal ourselves." Each day peeled back another layer of her assumptions. By day 4, Candace was no longer the same woman who had landed here. That evening, she stepped into the presidential palace, not with swagger, not with suspicion, but with respect. Ibrahim greeted her with a warm handshake. "Welcome to Burkina Faso, Miss Owens," he said, smiling. Candace held his gaze. "I owe you a lot more than an apology." He waved it off kindly. "No, you owe yourself the truth, and I'm glad you came to find it." They sat down for a quiet conversation, not for cameras, not for show. Candace looked out the palace window. Children were playing soccer in the distance, the sun glowing orange over the rooftops of Ouagadougou. "This is not the Africa I was taught to fear," she said. "It's not perfect, but it's powerful." Ibrahim nodded. "That's all we've ever asked. Not for charity, just for people to see us as we are." In that moment, Candace understood. She hadn't come here to change him. She had come here to change herself. When Candace Owens stepped off the plane back in Nashville, the air felt different. She looked around the terminal. Same blinking signs, same fluorescent lighting, same security announcements echoing through the halls. But nothing inside her was the same. Her suitcase rolled behind her, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still 5,000 miles away, back in a school courtyard in Ouagadougou, watching barefoot kids recite math equations with fire in their eyes. Back in a village clinic where a midwife whispered, "We don't need saviors. We just need someone to listen." The old Candace might have turned that into a punchline. Now she carried it like scripture. She went home, sat in front of her studio lights, and turned on the camera. Her followers expected fire. A hot take. A spin. They didn't expect silence. And then, a whisper. I was wrong. She let it hang. Raw. Unfiltered. I was wrong about a man. I was wrong about a country. And I was wrong about a continent. I thought I understood because I never took the time to understand it. The video went viral within hours. Not because of outrage, but because of honesty. For the first time, Candace Owens wasn't debating. She was reflecting. And people listened. Across the ocean, Ibrahim Troy sat in his office, watching the clip on a cracked tablet handed to him by one of his security guards. He smiled, but not the smile of victory. It was the smile of a teacher who saw a student finally understand. Within days, media outlets across the globe requested interviews. Not with Candace, but with him. Harvard Business School, BBC World News, Al Jazeera, even the New York Times. They all wanted to know who is Ibrahim Troy. But he didn't rush to answer. He stayed in Burkina Faso, attending a graduation ceremony in the north, where 27 girls had just become the first in their village to finish high school. This, he told them, is leadership. You, not me. Meanwhile, Candace made another bold decision. She aired a full-length documentary titled What I Saw in Burkina Faso. It featured footage from classrooms, hospitals, and marketplaces. No music, no narration, just scenes. Real life. At the end of the film, she appeared on screen and said, "Sometimes, you don't need to talk. You just need to see." Her most loyal followers were stunned. Some angry. Some moved. But the broader world saw something else. Not a woman who had folded, but a woman who had grown. The moment became cultural canon. Talk shows debated it. Universities dissected it. Students wrote essays about the interview that changed everything. In a final twist of fate, Candace invited Ibrahim Troy back onto her show 6 months later. This time, the tone was different. She didn't sit across from him with suspicion in her eyes. She sat beside him. And her first question, "What do you think the West still doesn't understand?" Ibrahim looked into the camera and said, without hesitation, that our strength is not in begging for recognition, but in building. Quietly, until the world can no longer ignore us. That line alone was clipped, shared, and printed on murals in schools across West Africa. By the end of the year, Ibrahim Troy wasn't just the president of Burkina Faso. He was the face of something bigger. A new kind of power. A new kind of leadership. One that didn't shout. One that didn't shame. One that taught just by standing still and telling the truth.